The CGA Tour, a podcast unlike any other. Now your host, Calvin Alexander.
Welcome back to the latest episode of the CGA Tour podcast. As always, here I'm your host, Calvin Glenn Alexander, hence the name here. And I am rejoined by recurring guests now on the podcast here, and the man behind pistolsfiringblog.com, or Pistols Firing, at Marshall Scott OK on X/Twitter, whatever you want to call it as. But the man, the myth, the legend himself, who's covered everything all up and down, the basketball content here, just we started Big 12 play last night, all of the good football things as well, including the transfer portal, the coordinators, the new hire, the new staff, and just staying up to date on the things. So, Marshall, how's it going?
Yeah, it's going well. Thank you for having me. These are always good to decompress on. It feels like a little bit therapeutic for me.
Yeah, well, coming to you live here, New Year's Eve. So, want to decompress, maybe ask you a little bit more here just to lead off the back here. What did you think about the football season hires here over the past month and kind of the coordinators? Because I don't think I've had you on since then to kind of just recap a little bit how you think that's gone so far.
Yeah, certainly a crazy, I don't even know when that Board of Regents meeting morning till now has been, at a breakneck pace. Got a little hairy there for a while. They ended up hiring, obviously, Todd Grantham as DC, Doug Meacham as the OC. Two guys with a ton of experience. A lot of critics will say maybe past their prime. But I think, given, everybody's hesitancy for Gundy to go find another Brian Nardo and wonder if that's going to work for them to just go and get some established names, I think is a step in the right direction. So yeah, it's been crazy. The portal's been nuts. I think that was expected no matter who the coaches were. But yeah, it's been a long month or so.
Yeah. Do you think there is any, because the one thing I've noticed here when the coordinator's hired and then their staff is hired as well too, is that it doesn't seem that Todd Meacham's bringing in a bunch of guys from TCU, Grantham, of course, from the NFL and the Saints, but he's not bringing in a bunch of previous guys he's worked with either, from at least what I can tell here. Do you think there's kind of, we're setting up some other younger guys also with the succession plan in place if everything goes real well for these older coordinators that are, right around Gundy's age right now or in their upper 50s or 60s?
Yeah, I think a lot of Grantham's guys he's coached with at different stops. The new defensive line coach worked with him at Florida, I believe. Then he was the DC at Charlotte. I believe one of the defensive backs coaches also had experience with Grantham. I'm trying to think if anybody had Meacham experience come along. Well, obviously the two offensive line guys coming in, both OSU alums. I believe that Meacham was there around their time at least. So yeah, I think it was good because, going back to Brian Nardo, and this isn't going to turn into a punchy brag Brian Nardo session, but like he wasn't he was tasked with, reestablishing Oklahoma State's defense. They wanted to run the 3-3-5. But whenever he got hired, he didn't get to bring anybody. There was no position coaches that he got to bring in. So I think that was a tough start for him to have to deal with. So yeah, I think it should be hypothetically, I guess, more beneficial that they were able to kind of bring in their own assistants, and I imagine that was somewhat collaborative. But I think it's just kind of better to get a vision set out before the entire program if you can bring in your own position guys.
Totally makes sense there. Well, moving on here, just to talk about their transfer portal tracker on pistolsfiringblog.com. That is the way I've been staying up to date on all of this, in case anyone's curious here and what's going on. I've got more of a breakdown coming here later on this week of the guys and, how many snaps they played and all type of stuff, just give you down to the video emphasis as well. But which of these guys here that is transferring in, because we'll talk about that first, you're just coming in. Seems like a lot of guys. There's a lot of JUCO guys, but there's also some, guys from D1, guy from just 90 miles down south of us here, from Norman too. Which kind of guy so far are you like, man, this guy, I will be willing to make more of a bet that he's an impact player next year versus some of the other guys coming in?
Yeah, I think obviously the quarterback Haas Haney is the most interesting. Anytime a quarterback comes in, that's going to be that way. But for them to kind of go out and get a young guy, they really liked him coming out of high school. They offered him a scholarship. They got Jalen Pope, who was, I think, a class above him from the same high school, but they worked really well together. So that's obviously a big get. Is he going to play? I'd imagine he's not coming to Oklahoma State to not play. But all of a sudden that, with Garrett Rangel, Zane Flores, Milwaukee Smith, all staying through this portal window, it certainly feels like that competition is going to be a lot of fun this spring. Then guys outside of that, I really like the UTEP defensive end transfer, Kyron. I don't know how to say his last name, Duhan, because I'm from southeastern Oklahoma, is what I'm going to say. Duhan, maybe. But he was a true freshman this past year. I believe he had 7 sacks, and like 5 of those came in the last handful of games. So that's obviously some production that's exciting. Then, a guy like J.K. Johnson, a defensive back transfer, he spent time at LSU and Ohio State. He was like a top 50 recruit in his recruiting class. He's had to deal with some injuries to kind of get to this point, but he's played at both of those places. So that's obviously, you just kind of wonder, what he's like post. I believe his most recent injury was something to do with his leg. But that could be a huge get if he can just sort of, scratch the surface. That is that potential that he at least at one point had. And then, a ton of tight ends. I'm not really sure what the tight end room is going to look like. I think they still really like Josh Ford, but they go get 3 tight ends. Tons of defensive linemen, tons of defensive backs. Retooled the offensive line quite a bit. It's kind of tough to say because there's a lot of young guys within the program that stayed, and then you add these to us anyways, lesser known names in. It just kind of seems like there's going to be a ton of competition this spring. So it's really tough for me to say anybody right now of who's going to play and who's going to play where. I think Brian McCoy, the Akron linebacker transfer, I think he's got a pretty good shot at playing early. But yeah, I think there will be a lot from this group that do make instant impacts. It's just kind of right now it sort of feels like throwing darts at a dartboard as to who's playing where.
Yeah, it sure seems like. I mean, they're, like you said, bunch of tight end guys, but a bunch of the line guys as well too. We knew coming into the last season that the entire offensive line was returning, most of the defense line was returning. Now, of course, that means that when you got guys returning, that they're going to go through the program. Some of us, speaking of myself, you're stay at college for as long as possible and go 6 years. Some other guys transfer in and out and do their time and get on with it. And some are also trying to get their doctorate. And Alan Bowman, but I'm glad he didn't come back for the 8th year, just because I want to see something a little bit new here in Stillwater, and also feel like at the end of the day, stepping back after the 7th year, I don't know if it could get better, but probably couldn't get any worse. And Alan Bowman, hey, best of luck here going forward, and I hope he's a coach one day, because I definitely think he's got the mental side of it. But with that being said here as well, I want to ask you about this quarterback room. As we talked about before we started recording, every guy's got a pronunciation guide. Zane Flores, so yep. I'm going to try to keep just going with that. Haas Haney as well here too. Going to try to keep now Milwaukee Smith. Not really sure. Still working on that one. But of this quarterback room so far, besides Haney, because like you said, throwing darts at a board here, that's hard to tell. Which guy are you like, hey, you know what, this guy would fit Meacham's system a little bit better, or is it just truly really hard to tell right now? Because granted, Rangel injured, into the season injured. We've never seen Zane Flores take a field. And then Malachi, I'm sure I'm mispronouncing it still, Smith here, he looked good, but like we lost 50-0 Colorado when he started, so I'm not really taking a bunch away from that game either, just because, I mean, you know what, true freshman, million things going on. I'm not really trying to downgrade a guy at all because of a Colorado game that never went right. So what do you think here of those 3 guys, or is it just truly really hard to tell?
Yeah, I think it is tough to tell. I think Meacham's offenses have in the past worked at its best with running quarterbacks, thinking back to those Trevon Boykin days at TCU. Among the 4, I think that Haney's probably the best runner, so you wonder if that gives him an edge. But we saw Garrett Rangel in that first half of that BYU game get out and run a little bit. Milwaukee Smith is serviceable runner. I think Zane Flores is a good runner, but like you said, we haven't seen him at all. It's sort of weird because like Zane was looked at as sort of the chosen one there for a while, but I think that's kind of how it is with a lot of fan bases. Is the backup quarterback or the young quarterback is always among the favorite players, especially when a team is struggling. So it's weird in that with Flores, we haven't gotten to see him yet. So he has a lot of hype around him. I think, going into the year last year, Gundy said that he was ready now. He just didn't have any experience. So now he still doesn't have experience. And now, there's this presumed four-way quarterback battle going on. So, yeah, I think as far as fitting Meacham the best, I might lean Haney just because, well, A, he went from TCU, like Meacham did, and then B, he's a runner, and I think that's something that he has done well. Trayvon Boykin wasn't like an NFL star by any means, but under Meacham, he finished 4th in the Heisman voting and 10th in the Heisman voting. So it's like, if you could get a running quarterback in there, that's probably your best bet. But with that being said, I think it's going to be a fairly open competition this spring. Like I said, I don't think Haney came in to not play. But with all those other 3 returners, those guys, they were ready for competition, whether Haney was here or not, with, among each other. So yeah, I think, adding one more to it, it's like, well, okay, here we go. So yeah, I think it's going to be a fun battle. Last spring wasn't very interesting, honestly, just because everybody had returned. So there wasn't a ton that we could even like ask whenever we showed up. And like by like week 3 of Gundy spring availabilities, it's like, okay, well, like, what do we even ask anymore? We know everybody on this team and stuff like that. That will not be the case this year, just because all this turnover, all these position battles that'll take place all throughout the roster. So yeah, if I had to say who fit Meacham the best, I think I'd lean Haney right now, but we've seen so little of all 4 of them that it'd be tough to say.
Yeah, it seems like you just said, tough to say overall. The one thing, though, is that I know previously we're not carrying 4 quarterbacks, especially 4 guys on scholarship, just continually for years on end. Granted, this is a whole new college football landscape with 12-team playoff and portal opening and transfer immediately, etc. But I do know that mid-March, we've got practice starting back up, and then the portal opens again for 10 more days, starting middle of April, basically. Do you anticipate college football looking like this, with like having to cut down the roster now to 105 and stuff like that, where you might have a big group of guys here over the offseason in one position, for example, for a quarterback, and then see some attrition and also some guys who leave as well too during that spring portal after they kind of figure out where they stand in line here? Because I can't imagine the guy who's 3rd or 4th not getting one offer to go play somewhere else theoretically, or at least be a backup and have a better chance of not being the 4th guy in the lineup, right?
Yeah, I would think that, especially in that quarterback room, I think that, once this gets worked out and once the writing is presumably on the wall come spring, like I don't think that, Gundy's not traditionally been very forthcoming with roster decisions and stuff like that. That's like he's probably not going to tell us who the starting quarterback is in the spring. I think that, he said after the Colorado game that they want to figure out who they are in the spring. That way they don't have sort of the issues that they had at the start of the 2023 season when they were rotating a bunch of guys, specifically at quarterback. And they just got off to such a slow start. He mentioned after the Colorado game that they need to get on that a little bit quicker. It's obviously crazy land now because, the entire roster is new. So there's a lot of work to be done there. But yeah, I think it would be certainly rare if they went through spring ball, and by that time, those guys kind of have a idea of what the pecking order is looking like. I think it'd be rare if all 4 of them stayed, but they've all stayed to this point. So I think given modern college football and the transfer portal and stuff like that, it's sort of weird that even that they've got these 3 quarterbacks that they've had recruited. They went Rangel, Flores, Smith. To have all 3 of those guys still on campus, I think is a little bit rare. So while I would expect somebody to maybe go look for a starting gig elsewhere. I think nothing's going to surprise me anymore with Oklahoma State. But yeah, I would think somebody would surely take a step out, but who knows? Yeah,
hard to tell for sure. Well, the other couple questions I have for you over football at the offseason is one here. How are we doing NIL wise? I always feel like that the social media construct of NIL is that, man, doom and gloom Oklahoma State, we're a small school. We've never been that great at football for continuously year over year, where it's just, hey, we're taking the lid off. I mean, we've won, Gundy's won 1 Big 12 championship. He's been to multiple, granted, but the one he won, there wasn't a championship game actually that year. So he won it just by basically just winning the regular season and winning the game straight up. So then when it comes to NIL stuff, I feel like caught on the fence here from understanding of how we line up. Gundy, highest paid coach in the Big 12. I know his contract's being restructured, so I got a follow-up question on that in a minute here. But how do we stand NIL-wise? Because on the other side of it, the social media kind of ideas are, oh, hey, donate every single cent you can. What are we doing NIL-wise? Who's the folks of the purpose guy? And then, leads me to one of the dumbest questions I've ever asked you of, hey, do we have a GM or whatever? And you're like, yeah, Kenyatta right, and we've got it going, and, we're all set up here. So how do we kind of stand when it comes to that NIL funding? And, are we adding more to the top and we're already kind of middle with doing the concert series here in the spring? Or is that just kind of making sure we keep up with everyone else?
Yeah, I think I don't think Oklahoma State's at the top of the NIL world. It's these things are so there's not really a guidelines for pretty much anything in college football right now. But so it's not on Oklahoma State or the Big 12 or anybody to kind of say, hey, this is how much money this team X team is working with. There was obviously with all the Gundy drama that week or two after the season. There was a lot of talk of boosters being mad, and boosters obviously play a huge role probably in the NIL landscape. But then the reports that Gundy's contract is going to be reworked, and it seems like he can't take money out of his contract and put it into NIL, but through some back channel or circumvention. I imagine that's sort of the goal here, and I think that might turn into somewhat standard issue for a lot of schools moving forward. I think coaches' salaries in college athletics have sort of grown exponentially. Now that the players are sort of getting a piece of this pie, I wonder if that's going to it's not going to stop coaches' salaries from going up, but at least maybe slow it down a little bit. Maybe it won't be as exponential. So, I guess that's a long-winded answer to saying I'm not really entirely sure where Oklahoma State stands NIL wise. They're not going and getting the top names out of the portal, but bringing in the ridiculous amount of people that they've had to bring in so far. I imagine that took some coin. So, it's tough to say, especially it's tough to say regardless of all the drama that's happened over the past month. But especially given, booster drama, Gundy drama, contracts, and it's sort of tough to say. I would say they're not last, but I would also say they're not first in the Big 12 at least.
Gotcha. Well, trying to put some maybe more clear details on the other Oklahoma State stuff here, just because you're right. NIL stuff, there's just no way of telling. I'm always curious, but I'm glad to know we're not last. And yeah, bringing in the transfers we are bringing in, especially from D1 programs, can't be free. So with all that being said here, I know it's been rumored from multiple reports here, Gundy's salary for the next couple of years got lowered. The rollover clause got taken away too. Did you ever heard any concrete details about like the buyout changing at all? I know that was $25.3 million. I would think it's got to be less because part of the buyout goes after you're staying on the contract. But you hear anything about that at all here, or really any updates that are like firm? It just seems like we're kind of told it was different and it'll be new, but maybe haven't gotten all the details yet.
Yeah, OSU had announced that whenever the wording that they put was whenever it was signed, more details would come to be, but that hasn't happened yet. I hate to say a report without giving credit to whoever reported, but I think I saw somewhere that the buyout was trimmed to $15 million. So that's, I believe, somewhat significantly reduced given to what it was, and then with the rollover, what it would have been sort of moving forward. So I think that as a part of all of this has gone down somewhat significantly. Obviously, $15 million to me and you is a lot of money. So we would certainly take that to not work anymore. But it's a lot lower. I think it was hanging around 25, before the next rollover. And then if that rollover would have stayed in place, it would have been even more, sometime next year. So I believe it got brought down a little bit, but it's going to be tough to tell until, that contract becomes public record and everybody can get their hands on it.
Yeah, that's the one other detail. I'm just curious to hear what's out there, because of course, if this season doesn't go great, I'm sure that there's, Zach Robinson will wait around forever to take the Oklahoma State head coaching job, or, we'll go get somebody like Bill Belichick, as a Facebook comment or a YouTube comment said not too long ago, which I would have loved. I just don't think his dad was ever a coach at Oklahoma State as well. I know he was only in North Carolina for 2 years before he went there, but nonetheless, here, moving on. I also, of course, want to ask about the the basketball season here as well, too, in a minute. But I do one more last football question here. What's the optimism for next season? I mean, is there, hey, no way we go winless in conference again, but of course we've got a non-conference against a team playing I think just tomorrow in Oregon. And we got to go there. Of course, the rest of the non-conference isn't too tough, one would think, but then again, I didn't see us going 0-9 in conference play. So what's the outlook, at least surrounding Oklahoma State football right now for next year? Is it more promising, more hopeful than maybe we had previously thought? Because I know previously we had talked about it and been like, well, hey, it's this season. And now it's like, well, this season was pretty rough. So what do we think about next year?
Yeah. Going into this year, it felt like the 2025 season was going to be the rough one. That happened in 2024. I don't, I'm not ready to predict that Oklahoma State is going to contend for the Big 12, but the Big 12 is crazy. Everybody picked Arizona State to finish last, and they ended up winning it, and they're playing tomorrow in the college football playoff. So it's tough to say. There's going to be a ton of competition. I don't think they're going to be outstanding, but I think that there is a path for them to kind of get, every Big 12 team was competing with each other throughout this year. I think Oklahoma State can join that group and maybe not as be beaten as handily all the time like it was last season, which is still, doesn't make any sense. But I think, all these changes and all this, it's breathed new life, I think, into the fan base. It's given a little bit more hope, which I think was desperately needed, given, the 09 Big 12 slate, the Gundy comments of people paying their bills and whatever that was about. Then that turns into a big fiasco or a Board of Regents meeting and then a standoff or whatever Pete Thamel was calling it, but between OSU and Gundy. So I think that, all of this change has kind of, in a way, made things a little bit more hopeful. There's things to get excited about. There's a new quarterback coming in. They've got all these guys out of the transfer portal. A lot of these young and up and comers, guys like Rodney Fields, David Kabongo, those types of guys stayed around. I think that Oklahoma State did a really good job in keeping that young core here. A lot of the guys that they lost to the portal were, more so guys that, had kind of been established. Dejon Stribling, you're going to sort of associate him with, the Alan Bowman era. So I'm not sure that it totally made sense for guys like that to kind of stay around. But yeah, I think that, with everything that's happened, but now with all of this turnover, there's at least a sense of hope for the fan base that it can get behind. And then the Big 12 it's winnable for everybody. The team in Arizona State could go from last to first. And teams week in and week out were competing with each other, and you never really knew who was going to win. So unless they were playing Oklahoma State, then you knew that team was probably going to beat Oklahoma State. So I think they're going to be more competitive going into next year. I think it'll also help that these teams aren't going to have film on whatever Oklahoma State's going to try and do. They might week 1 and 2 and stuff like that. Those guys might not even know who Oklahoma State's going to throw out there. I'm not sure how forthcoming Oklahoma State's going to be with that sort of information going into the season. So I think there's more hope now than there was certainly, whenever the clocks hit 0 in Boulder. But then even all the fallout after that, it sort of seemed like the sky was falling. But I think a lot of the moves here lately have at least inspired some hope in the fan base, which I think was maybe the most important thing of this offseason.
Gotcha. Well, all right. Well, moving on to the hardcore here. At least our beautiful Gallagher Arena core here. The first question I have here is that we play a top 15 team in the country that preseason is even, ranked top 15, but there's so many Big 12 teams that are so good. And we play Houston last night. Granted, we had a decade's worst, shooting percentage from the court, it seems, or maybe that's exactly true. But also we were, right in 4. Houston last night coming into the game was same record as us, 8-3. What kind of pauses are you taking away from last night here just to start out? Even though he's only scored 47.
Yeah, Houston's an elite defensive team. I think they rank first nationally in a lot of, pretty standard defensive statistics. I think Ken Pom had them as the number 3 team in adjusted defensive efficiency. So that's just, to a certain extent, that's sort of Houston basketball. Those are gonna be low scoring games. I think the positives to kind of take out of it, they're early. I think Oklahoma State at one point had a 17-11 lead. I think Pat Sumnick hit a shot with like 10:24 to play in the first half, and that gave them that lead. And then OSU didn't hit another field goal for the rest of the half, so that was certainly rough. But they showed, like defensively, they're a nuisance. They're going to get in passing lanes. They're going to get up on you. And Lutz sort of said this after, that they played really well for 12 or whatever minutes it was. But that should mean that they're at least capable of doing it for a full 40. And he's also been very forthright in saying, like, he thinks that this team is going to start shooting better. The last 3 or 4 games, specifically from 3, have not gone well, but they've had, games earlier in the season where they're, 38%, 42% or something like that from 3. I think if there's a world where, Oklahoma State has a good defensive game, like they've been apt to do. And then if they could just get some shots to fall, I think they're certainly going to be able to compete with some teams. I think they'll sneak a win here or there just because they do play so hard. And Kelvin Sampson, Houston's coach, after the game was very complimentary. He said he sees what, Lutz is trying to do here. that he sees like the vision that he's got laid out. And he also said like no teams that he's coached against have played harder than Steve Lutz's team. So I think those are all positives that you're taking. I think it's also important to remember this is still just year one of the Lutz era. Had to almost entirely rebuild a roster. And had to do that. I believe he's hired a little late in the, sort of transfer portal cycle. I think is April 1st before they, kind of officially announced his hiring. So, I think it's, it's year one. They're playing hard. Shots are not falling. I thought they had a lot of good looks last night. I think they finished like 3 for 22 on layup attempts, which is brutally rough. So yeah, I think there's some promise, but it's not looking so great for the time being this particular season. But like I said, I think they play so hard that on a night where their shots are falling, I think that they'll be able to compete, and I think that they'll get some of these teams.
Okay, well, with all that being said here, I do agree. I think that we're in a way better position this year, it seems, just to play tough with and competitively with other teams, because we're going to run up and down the court so often, and that was mentioned numerous amounts of times by the commentators on the broadcast too. There is one thing that just gets to me repeatedly when I look up and down the roster and kind of notice things. And that is that Chi or Marcel Avery, transfer from UCF this year, he has he's played in every single game this season. He's actually played more minutes than pretty much everyone except for Khalil Brantley and Bryce Thompson. I mean, that is true here. He's 1 minute behind Bryce Thompson, but he's yet to start a game. And of course, he's the leading scorer for the team on average as well, too, to add all to it. What do you make of that so far? Why is he not starting, or what's going on there?
Yeah, I think Lutz teams are built defensively first. And I think his defense has left a little bit to be desired to this point. I think he's capable of it. He's obviously got that long frame. He's athletic for being 6'8". So I think he's certainly capable of that. It just hasn't necessarily shown itself. There'll be times he'll miss a shot, and you could kind of see that miss affecting how he plays, the next 2 possessions up and down the floor. But yeah, he's got, bundles of potential, with that frame and his shooting ability and his scoring ability. But yeah, I think it's mostly maybe defensive based. It sort of, remind his relationship seemingly, and I don't know it that well, with Steve Lutz. It sort of feels similar to Mike Boynton's relationship with Caleb Boone, where it was, they loved each other. But there were certainly some head scratching moments that Caleb Boone would make, and Mike Boynton would, not let him know about it, but it was certain. There were certainly there were games that Caleb wouldn't start and be like, "What happened here?" And he's like, "Well, when he starts doing the right things, that's when." And I don't think that Chi-Chi's doing the wrong things by any stretch of the mean. I just think that defense is so integral to what Steve Lutz does that he wants to make sure that that all those I's are dotted and T's are crossed for Chi to start. And it could also just be a matter of rotations. Lutz has said plenty of times throughout the year that guy 1 through 9 isn't a lot different on this team. They've got a bunch of guys of a similar skill level. So it could just be more of a matter of, Lutz likes this group running this way. And yeah, I imagine he said throughout that the starting lineup will be pretty fluid. I think their 3 guards, went over from the field last night. So you wonder if there's going to be a shakeup there, but yeah, I think, Chi-Chi's, he's still playing a lot of minutes. He's still scoring, a lot relative to Oklahoma State standards. So I wouldn't be too beaten up about him maybe not starting a game.
Gotcha. Well, with that here, it seems as though there's something not that we could unlock here, but maybe that we just need going forward. And I thought Bryce Thompson would be more of the guy here. Hey, we can go to him as a scorer, but last night he was held scoreless. But then again, he only played 11 points. Is there much going into why Bryce hasn't played that many minutes, and why we're not really seeing one guy step up here on the team overall, just as the scorer on the team, either through the first 12 games?
Yeah, I think it was an elbow that he banged up either in the Bedlam game or the game before the Bedlam game. I remember he wore a sleeve out to the Bedlam game, which he doesn't usually do. At some point, in halftime or something, he tore it off, and So I think that he's a little bit banged up right now. But then there's times last night he just like pretty much everybody on the team was not getting shots to fall whatsoever. And yeah, I think that's something that Oklahoma State's sort of lacking right now is a dominant scorer. You mentioned Chi-Chi, but he's it feels like he'll go on a NATO run by himself and then maybe, disappear for a little bit. So I think that's something that they'll need to continue to work through. I think Bryce catches a lot of flack on Twitter, on everywhere, because he was a former 5-star recruit. He's still in college and stuff like that. But I think Bryce has been very good for Oklahoma State over the years. I think he's still averaging like 10 points a game, which we just saw them score 47 points. If you're going to need all the scoring you can get. So I think he is a little bit banged up, and I think last night was just kind of not his night.
Yeah, it definitely makes sense against that really tough Houston defense. And to only back you up here on everything, I mean, Chichi Avery's defensive plus minus is way worse than his offensive plus minus. So I only could agree that, yeah, what you're saying, clearly these Lutz teams are built defense out first. Have you taken anything away from, Grant, 12 games, one game so far that's, in conference, but have you taken away from the season where you're like, hey, this is where I think Lutz wants to build the team going forward. He wants these types of players that are really scrappy, like Arturo Dean, who led the nation steals last year, or anything like that.
Yeah, I think it is probably, probably prefer them a little taller than Arturo Dean. I think I'm Arturo Dean's biggest fan right now, but I think it's kind of those style of players. He wants to get out and run. And that's obviously creating turnovers and things along that nature. That's how those things get rolling. You need a big movable center. I thought it would have been sweet. And, I don't blame Brandon Garrison for leaving, given, all that happened with the coach firing and stuff like that. But I think that Brandon Garrison in this, Abu Usman's been great for Oklahoma State so far. So that's not even knocking anything from him. But, Brandon Garrison was a rim runner. And I think that sort of style would fit well. I think those are kind of the types of guys that maybe Lutz will go after, even though, Makai Regland, who they signed, he's a big dude. He's a hoss. So that'll be kind of fun how that works out. So yeah, I think it's a defensive first style. Sampson last night said there are a lot of brilliant offensive minded coaches who are without a job right now or something like that, because he's talking about how important defense is specifically in college basketball. So I think that's kind of where where the focus is for Oklahoma State, is to get some athletic guys who can create turnovers and kind of get out and run and push the floor, get a center who could seal in the lane, and get layups at the basket pretty quick in the shot clock. I think that's the goal. Obviously doing that in the Big 12 is easier said than done. Doing anything in the Big 12 in terms of basketball is easier said than done. But I think that's kind of the vision.
Well, on that whole Big 12 conference deal here, I know the SEC is off to an amazing start with how many teams they've, just prolifically just playing greatly. One of them, of course, was our Bedlam foe here, OU. Did you take away from that Bedlam matchup more than, hey, OU's good and we're hoping to be decent in the Big 12, but probably won't be that decent because, honestly, we probably won't make the tourney. There's not enough teams in the Big 12 where I go, yeah, you know what? If there were 30 teams, maybe we'd be 15th, but I'm not sure who those other teams would be. So what do you make of that Bedlam game here between OSU and OU just earlier this month?
Yeah, it was another night that shots were not falling for Oklahoma State. They ended up shooting 39% from the field, which is not great, 28% from three, which is not great. And then even defensively, that wasn't their best night. It seemed like OU had a pretty good plan for that. So I don't know that there's too much that you can draw on it. At the end of the day, it was a big game, obviously, for the fan base. But it was just, a single standalone game in, I don't even know what month. It was probably in December, but my days have been so crazy. So yeah, I don't know if there's too much to grab out of it. I think OU is pretty good this year. But with that being said, I don't know that you can have any big overarching takes for Oklahoma State from that game or any singular game. I think it's more so going to, kind of come over time as more data points get added with kind of this Steve Lutz era.
All right. Well, you said it better than I could. This team is going to be, a work in progress better than on the season, but there are a couple teams I think we could beat. Currently, there were 4 Big 12 games last night in Cincinnati, Colorado, and TCU also picked up a loss. Is there a team in the Big 12 you think, hey, when we match up against them, we've got a really good chance of beating them, or is it just even too early in the schedule to know how everyone shakes out?
Yeah, I think, Kansas State was looking winnable. You know, they'd lost a game to Liberty, they lost to St. John's and Drake, and Wichita State kind of hammered them by 19. But then they beat Cincinnati last night. So, I think as far as, picking specific teams that Oklahoma State could beat, I think, that Kansas State game is potentially winnable. I think, as we're talking, I think West Virginia went into the half up pretty big on Kansas. That's who Oklahoma State plays Saturday. So, that game's obviously looking tough. Anytime you go to Morgantown, it's going to be pretty tough. I think Colorado's a winnable game. UCF, I think, is a potentially winnable game. And then I think there will just be like one or two other games that, Oklahoma State plays really well in, and, because they're playing so hard, and, maybe another team isn't equipped to handle, that in your face kind of style of play that Oklahoma State's going to get. As far as like predicting how many or anything like that, I'm not totally sure, but I think that Kansas State game, which is Tuesday, I think that's a winnable one. I think, they get Colorado at home. I think that's a winnable one. And then you're just kind of looking to pick off, teams here and there. I think, Arizona State's a good team, but I think that's a game that Oklahoma State can be competitive in. UCF, I think that's a game that Oklahoma State could be competitive in. So I think there will be, a handful that Oklahoma State's, right there. It's just going to kind of come down to who's better on that night.
Well, West Virginia, go in there for the next game, of course. They have a guy who, unfortunately, was on our roster last year in Javon Small, who's now just lighting it up. He's the leading scorer in the Big 12. He's the leading scorer in just points and points per game, and probably several other stats here as I dig more into it. How much of this of surprise is this that Javon Small is playing this well? Because last year, I got to say, I didn't want him to leave. I, of course, wanted him to stay for Oklahoma State, but last year he played around the same amount of minutes for us that he's playing this year for West Virginia, 33 and then 35 respectively. It seems like he's just kind of come out of nowhere and blossomed a ton. I mean, his field goal attempts are way more per game than they were with us. Granted, we're through 11 games here now, and for West Virginia, and he played 31 games last year for Oklahoma State. But have you been shocked at all, or even just gone, hey, you know what, it's crazy scoring almost 20 a game for West Virginia? I mean, I know he scored 15 a game for us here as I look at it, but it seems like he's kind of blossomed, or really just he somehow is playing just so much better for West Virginia than he ever played for Oklahoma State. Am I even right in saying that?
I don't think so. I think he was good at Oklahoma State, and I think he's just kind of the next natural step in his progression. I think he's just a hooper. I think when it comes down to it, was that BYU game last year. He scored a ridiculous amount of points just in the second half alone. I think. Let me see if I can find it super quick. But I think he dropped 39, 40, something like that. 34 was what it ended up being at BYU. So he went off. He had 6 games of 20 or more points last season. So I think it's certainly something he's capable of. Oklahoma State wasn't the best shooting team around him last year. So I think, the floor may be opening up a little bit more for him. They've got some other good guys in that team. Tucker DeVries, the coach's son, he's pretty good as well. So I think maybe without, I think whenever he was playing at Oklahoma State last year, there were a lot of, scouting reports and stuff about Javon Small. I think, he was kind of one of the main focuses, and obviously scoring 20 points a game, you're going to climb up those scouting reports. But I just think there's maybe a little bit more that teams are having to defend whenever playing West Virginia than just Javon Small. And I think that's kind of helping open things up for him a little bit.
Gotcha. Well, looking forward to the rest of the schedule here in basketball, especially that Big 12 slate here. I mean, you said at West Virginia this Saturday, then KC at home on Tuesday. How do you think we could do in the Big 12 this year? Is there any shot at all at the tournament, or is there kind of a hope that we finish, kind of 12th in the Big 12? Because in our preseason, we weren't to finish that well. What do you think kind of the fair expectations are for this team there?
Yeah, I think tournament hopes would be slim. I think that's going to be tough. I don't think it's impossible, because like I said, this team plays really hard, and I think that they'll be able to compete on certain nights, which is about anybody. And, the start of that Houston game, again, it's a game that they ended up scoring 47 points in, and, we're down 22 or something at one point. So I don't want to I don't want to act like this was a good game for Oklahoma State, but there were points in that game where, you're like, okay, I kind of see, how this team can compete with teams, they were down. I don't remember what the score was at halftime. I think they were down 10, and they didn't score for the final 10-24 of the first half. So, if they could just, be a little bit more consistent in those aspects, I think they're going to be fine in terms of competing. But yeah, I think I think making the tournament's going to be a tough ask this year, just because the Big 12's deep like it always is, and you're going to be trying to cling. If you get up to 8th, is that like tournament range? I don't know. So those will be questions that'll be asked. But that's finishing in the there's 16 teams in this league now, so that's that's finishing about halfway up the table, which is going to be tough for this group that's just coming together. It's year one of the Lutz era, but I do think that they'll compete throughout the season.
Gotcha. All right. Well, I'm going to pivot back to football, just because I think I've asked you enough basketball questions here, maybe for the day or for a while here. But I want to ask you on the football perspective here as we kind of close out this. What do you think will be the craziest thing that happens this coming up season for the football season that could happen? I mean, is Todd Meacham like that much different of a offensive play caller, where we might see whole new schemes that we never saw under Casey Dunn, or Todd Meacham being a previous wide receivers coach and Casey Dunn being a previous wide receivers coach, and now then both becoming OCs at Oklahoma State, and I've also, of course, worked for Mike Gundy. It'll be kind of the same offense we've seen year over year, or do you think defensively we could just see a crazy whole new defense with a bunch of guys who are starters who have the whole offseason to prepare, and we're not having Nick Martin go down and Colin Oliver go down and guys step in their place that burned perennial All-Americans and starters, that now, this defense is just going to be just that much better just because they'll be fully healthy and have a whole offseason to practice as well too.
Yeah, I think scheme-wise it'll be I don't think it's going to be totally similar, but I think it will be somewhat similar, just because, like you mentioned, Meacham sort of he's coached a lot of different places, but this is kind of the he's sort of grown up under the Gundy umbrella of things, and there's a lot of similar offenses out there that he's sort of been a part of. So I think that there will be some similarities, but the personnel is going to be so much different that it might look totally different, or if Haney is their guy and he's as good as a rusher as we think he is, then that certainly changes the looks of a lot of things moving forward, because we've Alan Bowman, he was pretty good in 2023, but he's not a runner. That's just not something that he did. So if they get a guy back there who is a dual threat type guy, I think it's going to look quite a bit different. For Grantham, I'm interested. I believe I've read some stuff from like Adam Lunt and Dustin Ragusa of there's a lot of like tweener players that are really good for Meacham. So kind of identifying and finding those guys of is this guy a defensive end, or is he a linebacker? Is this guy a linebacker or a safety? This guy playing in the nickel, can he handle all these responsibilities? Those are questions that I don't know that we'll have answered until maybe halfway through next season, honestly. So that's tough to say, but I think everything's going to, even if they ran the exact same schemes on both sides of the ball, which I don't think that they're going to, but even if they did, the personnel is so much different going into this that I think it's going to look a lot different kind of next year, just because they're going to play to strengths. No matter who the quarterback is, he's probably going to be a better runner than Bowman was. So that's certainly going to be an aspect that teams are going to have to account for next year. You don't have Ollie Gordon. You've got Rodney Fields, who's a little bit more shifty, smaller type back. Brendan Presley's not there anymore. I think Gavin Freeman's going to be a stud. DeJuan Lofton, another slot guy. I think he's really good as well. But I don't think they're going to, just try to do the same things that they try to do with Brennan, with those guys, maybe with Freeman, honestly. But yeah, I just think the personnel is so much different that I think things will look quite a bit different, even if the schemes were the exact same. And I don't think that's going to be the case.
All right. Well, very last question here, completely on the podcast. What do you take away from the additions and subtractions from the transfer portal, and like what groups of players do you think we stand as being kind of the best at, or what players do you think, hey, we really still could be looking for guys in the transfer portal and come April, because we just haven't filled in the guys in this December window either?
Yeah, I think offensive line is a place that they'll probably continue to look, just because they've lost every player, every offensive lineman who started a game last year is no longer on the team. Isaiah Glass was the only one who could return. The rest of them ran out of eligibility, and he hit the portal. So I think that, just getting bodies in that room, I think might be a priority kind of moving forward. Guys they lost, kind of like I mentioned earlier, I thought it was super interesting that they kept a lot of, the young guys that they're really excited about. I think that's a good sign that's kind of underrated given all the craziness that's happened over the past month. But they were able to keep, a talent Shetron, who's, battled through injuries. I think he's going to, whenever he's playing like he played this past year, before his injuries. You just see that potential that he's got. So I think keeping guys like that, keeping guys like Rodney Fields, even Trent Howland, keeping, a lot of those young defensive backs, Dave Gabongo, Landon Cleveland, keeping Jaleel Johnson, Deshaun Brown on the defensive line, keeping Austin Kowecki, who I think they've on the offensive line, who's I think they've got big plans for in 2025. I think those are all kind of positive signs that are kind of sliding under the radar just because of, look at this guy coming in, look at this guy going out, look at, all the new coaches going on. I think that was an underrated part of, a positive part of what Oklahoma State was able to do. And then, defensive line, I think I couldn't, they added so many that it would be tough for me to imagine them going after more. Somewhat similarly to defensive backs. Thought it was really interesting. Their emphasis on JUCOs. I think they've got, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 junior college commits, which with that Vanderbilt quarterback ruling, those guys are going to get a little bit more eligibility, I'd assume. So that's just kind of going to be interesting to see how the junior college recruiting nationwide continues to play out. But yeah, I think, I think the portal, as much as, I think a lot of these guys that they've gotten out of the portal are going to have to contribute, quickly in Stillwater. I think it was also a big deal of some of the guys that they were able to keep that, Oklahoma State, the casual Oklahoma State fan might not know a ton about because, he didn't play much to this point. But I think a lot of those guys that they've been excited about. I've been hearing about Austin Kowecki since he was like a freshman. And offensive linemen don't often play whenever they're freshmen. So, with it sort of finally being his time, I think Oklahoma State's really excited about him. I think Oklahoma State's really excited about Rodney Fields. I think there were a lot of underrated wins that they were able to keep some of those guys. And then, there are just so many bodies coming in, and they got a lot of offensive linemen, they got a lot of defensive linemen, they got a lot of defensive backs, they got a lot of tight ends. I'd imagine, some of those guys are going to play, but who's going to stand out next to the other? And it's been so hard to even watching film. It's like, okay, well, I'm watching this guy's film from Charlotte. How does this compare to this guy's film from LSU, or this guy's film from the junior college level? So I think that's all just going to have to be worked out in spring. I do think a lot of those guys are going to play early. I think this is kind of the first time that Oklahoma State's had to jump 2 feet into the portal like they did this year. This is the new era of college football. Oklahoma State's always been so good at cultivating young talent and developing them. But kind of with this being reset, I think this was necessary for them to hit the portal this hard. And I think a lot of those guys are going to play, but who? I've got no idea at this point.
So it seems like a tough question to answer, and a tough, probably a tough question to ask even to Gundy and others, because I want to say last year in the spring, you asked Gundy, hey, is Bowman going to start? And even then he wouldn't commit to Bowman, the Big 12 championship, at least attendee, and beating Texas A&M last year in the bowl game pretty darn well. Gundy wouldn't even commit fully to Alan Bowman playing in last spring. So it seems like getting that question asked and answered out of Gundy is just inconceivable at this point until we see week 1 next year. Marshall, I do want to say thank you so much for joining here and sharing all the thoughts here on the podcast. The portal thing is weird to me, though, because, right now as I look on the portal tracker, like there's still guys who have, decide or could have already decided or whatever it may be. But do you guys have to decide by the time the portal closes where they're transferring to, or are they able to just kind of, hey, I'm in the portal and then I can decide or I can get offered or whatever at any time, or do they have to make that final commitment by December 28th?
Yeah, so the portal closed, what was that, Saturday? But that just means people can't enter it. People can still come out of it. But a lot of those guys are going to want to get out of it before spring classes start at whatever their next destination is, because you got to be enrolled to get to spring practice to do all that. So, maybe there will be some guys that are, just lingering in there throughout the spring semester and, maybe hop in for a fall camp after that. But yeah, I think a lot of the guys that are in right now that, are the notable names. By the time, January, I don't know when classes start, 10th ish come around, I think they'll all have homes. But yeah, even though it's closed, guys can still guys that are already in the portal can still pick out. And there will be some guys that trickle in over the next few days as well, because I think once your bowl game ends, there's like a 10 or 5 day window a portal window that opens up. So, whenever this Michigan Alabama game is over, I think, maybe some of those guys jump in and things along that nature. And there's, it's tough to keep up with because there's exceptions to seemingly every rule. But yeah, for Oklahoma State right now, nobody can enter now, but they can still pull some guys out of it if they feel the need.
Well, it truly does seem like the Wild West then, because just that answer alone is just kind of making my head kind of have multiple questions here, especially with, I see on the offer list Oklahoma State has on pistolsfiringblog.com here, Cunningham, the defensive lineman from Penn State. I'm guessing he can just decide, 6 games after their, up to 6 games after their bowl game ends, but they play tomorrow and maybe their final bowl game, maybe not, if they end up winning. So, and I got to say, I'm more willing to pick Penn State over Boise State than I had thought previously, just because Penn State looks, pretty good so far here. But yeah, the other thing I want to note is that just it's crazy from what you're saying about the spring semester of when it starts. Because I know, for example, just having some family members go to different schools, UCLA is on trimesters. So I just wonder how that factors in here of, okay, well, all right, well, I'll get in there for the summer trimester and how will it count and how will these classes change when at the end of the day, if you're a guy who's transferred from UCLA to Oklahoma State, you may not at all be going to the NFL. Like, it just is conceivable you're going to be an elite guy at Oklahoma State, play really well, maybe go to another league, but the NFL is also probably something that's always on your mind and always just kind of one of those hopes and, things guys are progressing towards, but how our class is going to transfer, how is it going to all work out? So it just is very interesting to see how it all works out, and I'm curious here when the NCAA does decide to try to rein in college football, and then what happens? Because then are we going to have the teams that go, you know what, we're calling this college football, but it's college football because the guys play for colleges, but they may not attend there. I'm just very curious to see where all this goes at the end of the day, too.
Yeah, the academic calendar makes it really messy, which, again, it's college football. That's the but, people are like, well, the portal's, messing with the bowl games and messing with the playoff and stuff like that. They've got to move the window. Well, they can't really move the window because if they move it too much later, then the classes, they can't get in there in time for spring classes start. And again, it is college football. They're still student athletes. So yeah, there's a lot of mess that maybe doesn't necessarily have answers to. I'm sure that something's going to get figured out moving forward. But yeah, it's a mess. It's a mess because you can't really move the portal. Could you move it back? Well, then you're, messing with the regular season. All of a sudden our team's going to just lose players in the regular season. And if you move it too far forward, then you're, messing with, the start of the spring semester. So, maybe there's a smoother middle ground where, say classes, traditionally start January 10th at, whatever school, maybe you could do like December 20th through January 10th. Like, I don't know. It's somebody getting paid a lot much more than I do. We'll have to figure that out.
That's without a doubt true, because in the same boat here, there's somebody who's going to figure all this out and put it all together where it'll actually make sense. But then also there's going to be reseeding, it seems like, in college football playoffs, because I can't think Arizona State and Boise State are going to host games for forever. When you've got Ohio State playing in the first game, but then again, Ohio State gets to host Tennessee. Tennessee looks cold playing in the horseshoe, and Ohio State kills them, and then Ohio State gets to play, kind of a tough opponent, of course, in Oregon, but like, is Oregon that good? So I don't know. There's just so many different things here, all flying around, because they've already played once earlier in the season. Why are they playing 2 new schools or whatever? So there's just so much to it. And then we talk transfer portal stuff and wonder how it works in basketball and baseball and just how it all filters through with portals opening and closing all the time here and there. So anyways, if you're not already, please follow at Marshall Scott OK on X/Twitter, whatever you want to call it. And follow pistolsfiringblog.com. Go check out Marshall's latest articles and their transfer portal tracker to hear all these guys' names Marshall mentioned, and then with hyperlinks to basically every single one of them as well, too, so you can kind of know who's coming, going, a little bit about them, and what's going on. So, Marshall, thank you so much again here for joining the latest episode of the podcast. And if you're not already, please subscribe. I don't plug that enough, is what I've been told. So please subscribe to the podcast here for the CGA Tour, the Calvin Glenn Alexander Oklahoma State Sports Tour, as sorts here. So, Marshall, thanks again so much, and we'll catch you guys again soon.